Single dad saved his drunk boss from trouble. Next day, she remembered and changed his life. It was late at night when the restaurant lights went out, and a tired single dad finally walked out after a long double shift. His uniform smelled of food and sweat, his hands sore from hours of cleaning tables, but his mind was only on one thing: his little daughter waiting at home. She was his whole world, the reason he worked so hard, even when life gave him nothing but exhaustion. As he crossed the empty parking lot under the dim streetlight, he heard laughter, mocking, cruel laughter. Then he saw her, his boss, the same woman who barked orders all day, barely acknowledged his presence, and seemed too proud to ever show weakness. But now she was stumbling, clearly drunk, trying to get to her car while a few men blocked her path, teasing and cornering her like predators. He froze for a moment, realizing this could turn bad fast. Without another thought, he rushed forward. The men sneered at him, calling him names, trying to intimidate him, but he didn't back off. He stood tall, his voice steady, warning them to walk away. Maybe it was the fire in his eyes, or maybe they realized he wasn't afraid. They backed off eventually, muttering as they left. He turned to her, and she could barely stand. Her words were slurred, her eyes filled with confusion and pride. She tried to push him away, saying she didn't need help, but he ignored her protests. He gently took her keys, helped her to his car, and drove her home. The silence inside the car was heavy. She didn't even recognize him. When they reached her house, he helped her inside, left a bottle of water by her bed, and quietly walked away. He didn't tell anyone what happened. He didn't expect gratitude. For him, it was simple. Doing the right thing didn't need witnesses. The next morning, he came to work like nothing happened. But the office was buzzing with whispers. People talked about how their boss had been seen outside the club drunk, rumors spreading fast. She walked in later that morning, her eyes sharp, her expression unreadable. When their eyes met, she paused. Something about his calm face made her uneasy, as if there was something she couldn't remember. Days passed, but that memory haunted her. One evening, she checked the security footage from her building and froze. There he was, carrying her, shielding her from the cold, making sure she got home safe. The man she'd overlooked and underpaid had been the one to save her. Shame and gratitude washed over her. The next morning, she called him into her office. He stood there nervously, thinking he might lose his job. But instead, she thanked him softly, her voice trembling with sincerity. She offered him a raise, a better position, and something more: respect. His eyes watered as he realized how one quiet act of kindness had changed everything. He didn't save her for reward, but in doing so, he ended up saving both of their lives in different ways. He helped her into his car, ignoring her protests that came out in slurred, angry words. She was too drunk to realize who he was, too lost in her pride and confusion to understand that the man she was yelling at was one of her own employees. Her perfume mixed with the scent of alcohol, and her hands trembled as she tried to push him away. But he didn't stop. He buckled her seatbelt gently, started the car, and drove through the silent streets, glancing at her now and then to make sure she was all right. The city lights flickered across her tired face, and for a brief moment she looked nothing like the powerful woman who ran the restaurant. She looked human, fragile, scared, and lonely. When they reached her apartment, she could barely walk. He supported her up the steps, found her keys in her purse, and opened the door. Inside, the room was spotless but empty, like a life built on success but not warmth. He helped her sit on the couch, left a glass of water beside her, and softly said, "You're safe now." She didn't reply. Her eyes were already closing, lost in sleep. He stood there for a moment, then quietly left, locking the door behind him. The next morning, he came to work as if nothing had happened. His shirt was neatly ironed, his apron tied, his usual calm expression hiding the exhaustion in his eyes. He didn't expect thanks, didn't even expect her to remember. For him, it was just something decent people did: help someone in need and move on. But when he entered the kitchen, he could already feel the tension. The whispers had started. Some of the staff were gossiping about how their boss had been spotted outside a downtown bar, completely drunk. A few laughed, others looked shocked. He kept his head down, washing dishes, pretending not to hear. A few hours later, she arrived. Her heels clicked sharply against the tile floor, her hair tied perfectly, but her face was pale and stiff. Everyone went silent as she passed through the hallway, avoiding her gaze. She was humiliated, but too proud to show it. She threw orders as usual, trying to act normal, but her voice cracked once or twice. Then, as she walked past him, her eyes flickered up, just for a second. Something about him made her pause. Maybe it was the familiarity of his voice the night before, or the calm in his eyes that didn't match the gossip around her. For a moment, she froze as if trying to remember something hidden just out of reach. But pride won again. She turned away and walked off without a word. He watched her go, a faint smile on his face. She might not know yet, but deep down, he knew that one day she would remember. And when she did, everything would change. That night, as she sat alone in her apartment, the world felt strangely heavy. Her head still pounded from the drinks, her memories coming back in broken flashes, the cold air, the sound of footsteps, a man's steady voice telling her she was safe. But she couldn't remember who he was. Out of curiosity and discomfort, she opened her phone and checked the building's security footage. What she saw made her heart stop. There she was, barely able to stand, and there was a man carrying her carefully to the door, making sure she didn't fall. He even placed his jacket over her shoulders before walking away into the night. When the camera caught his face under the dim light, she gasped. It was him, her employee. The quiet single dad who always worked late, never argued, never complained. The man she barely noticed at all. She stared at the screen for a long time, unable to look away. The guilt washed over her in waves. She had been so cold to him, so dismissive, and yet he had been the one to step in when no one else would. The next morning, she barely slept. Her mind replayed that footage over and over, each time making her heart sink deeper. When she arrived at work, her usual sharp energy was gone. Her staff noticed her silence but said nothing. She called his name softly from her office, and when he entered, he looked confused. He thought he might have done something wrong. His hands fidgeted nervously, his shoulders slightly bent as if he expected to be scolded. For a long moment, she couldn't speak. She just looked at him, the man who had every reason to walk away but didn't. Then, in a quiet, trembling voice, she finally said, "You saved me." He blinked, unsure how to respond. She continued, "I saw the footage. I remember now. You didn't just help me. You protected me when you didn't have to." He shook his head humbly, saying softly that it was nothing, that anyone in his place would have done the same. But she knew that wasn't true. Not everyone would have risked their safety for someone who barely treated them with kindness. She could see the honesty in his eyes, the calm strength that came from living for something more than himself. Her own eyes watered, something that rarely ever happened. "I owe you more than words," she said quietly, her voice breaking slightly. He smiled faintly and replied that he didn't want anything, that he was just glad she was okay. As he turned to leave, she stopped him, her voice softer than ever. "You've reminded me what real decency looks like." When he left the room, she sat in silence, realizing that one simple act of kindness had not only saved her, but also shown her how empty her own life had become. For the first time in years, she felt something unfamiliar, respect for someone who had every reason not to care. Weeks passed, and the air inside the restaurant began to feel different. She had changed in subtle ways. Her voice was softer, her eyes warmer, and her attitude toward the staff less distant. But the one person who noticed none of this was him. The single dad kept his head down, working hard as always, clocking in early and leaving late. His life was simple. Work, go home, make dinner for his little girl, and hope the next day was a little easier than the last. Yet she couldn't stop noticing him now. Every time he smiled at a customer, every time he helped another coworker without being asked, every quiet moment where he carried the weight of life without complaint, she saw all of it. It humbled her. For the first time, she understood what real strength looked like. It wasn't loud or proud. It was silent, patient, and kind. One morning, she arrived earlier than usual and found him mopping the floor before his shift had even started. He didn't see her standing there, watching him with a strange mix of admiration and guilt. She walked back to her office, opened her drawer, and stared at an envelope she had been preparing for days. Inside was a promotion letter, a raise that would finally pay him what he deserved, and a small handwritten note that said, "Thank you for reminding me what humanity means." Her hands trembled slightly as she sealed it. When he later came to her office to report for duty, she asked him to sit down. He looked confused, nervous, as if he thought he'd done something wrong again. She smiled gently and slid the envelope across the desk. "You said you didn't want anything," she began softly, "but I can't ignore a man with a heart like yours." He hesitated, then opened it. As he read the letter, his eyes widened. For a long moment he couldn't speak. The raise meant more than money. It meant stability. It meant he could finally afford better clothes for his daughter, pay her school fees on time, maybe even move into a safer neighborhood. His eyes filled with tears, and he tried to thank her, but no words came out. She simply nodded, her own voice low. "You earned this long before that night," she said. "I just never saw it until now." When he left her office, the staff noticed something different about him too. His steps were lighter, his smile brighter. For her, it wasn't just about repaying a debt. It was about learning a lesson she would never forget. She realized that leadership wasn't about power, it was about compassion. And sometimes the people who seem the smallest carry the biggest hearts. From that day forward, their connection went beyond titles and hierarchy. It was built on mutual respect, quiet gratitude, and the unspoken truth that a single act of kindness could change two lives forever.